Farms were only producing enough to survive, with little surplus. Lords began to take over farmland and started the agricultural revolution. With lords taking over, people lost their independence and grew sick of the low-profit, hard farm work. People left farms and rural land to find easier work in the cities and factories. They wanted to start a better life. Most of the population left. In 1820, 80% of the population lived in rural areas. In 1850, only 50% did. Before the Industrial Revolution, people used wood for many things, like construction, tools, heating, and energy. Large use of wood as fuel caused vast deforestation. Entire forests were cut down. With the Industrial Revolution, people began using coal and stopped using as much wood. They used coal for fuel and iron and steel for tools and construction. This allowed forests to regrow and replenish the environment. Rural areas also were not as affected by pollution from factories as urban areas were.
Because of lack of transportation and communication technologies, rural areas could not easily connect to other places before the Industrial Revolution. It was hard for people to travel, and the only contact with others was through trade. Trains, cars, and new forms of communication connected rural towns to other cities and ports. They no longer had to wait weeks for a message and could get supplies quicker. As they grew more connected, rural areas became more civilized.
Because of a surplus due to more advanced farming tools and techniques, the population grew and many people moved into towns. The birth rate as well as lifespans increased. Furthermore, the death rate decreased as sanitation improvements and surplus extinguished diseases. Urban population exploded because less people were needed on farms, and those workers streamed into the cities, finding jobs at factories.
The agricultural revolution lessened the demand for workers needed on farms, so excess people streamed in from the countryside, going to cities to look for jobs. Typically, they found these jobs in factories. As a result of the steady stream of people coming into various cities, living conditions and sanitation took a plummet. Factories are one of the contributing factors for the worsened living conditions because they released large amounts of smog, which polluted the environment. Air quality was horrible and impacted the health of workers and people in the surrounding areas. As cities grew in size and developed, many systems were implemented to lessen the waste that accumulated. Since cities tried to cram as many workers and families into apartment or home as possible, living areas were not clean and trash would promote sickness and uncleanliness. Sanitation technology like sewage systems were installed underground to carry waste out of homes, instead of it being dumped and discarded in the streets, which led to sickness and a disgusting smell. Trash collectors took away garbage like old food, which led to a cleaner living environment both inside and outside the home.
As factories were developed, more people moved from country to towns to find work. Houses were built near factories so people could walk to work. Other jobs included coal mines, chimney sweeps, mills, and clothing factories. 2/3 of factory workers were children. They started working as young as 7 to supply money for their families. Children worked 14 to 16 hours a day with little break time. They were often treated badly by their supervisors.
Cities also expanded to accommodate the rapidly growing population. Builders and city planners created new neighborhoods with apartments and large paved roads and boulevards, which were bigger in comparison to the slim and damped cobblestone pathways of before. This also contributed to the developing social status in urban areas. In old cities like London, the rich lived in the inner areas, close to the church in their large residences, and the poor lived on the outskirts of town, in the suburban areas where factories were, for easy transportation to and from work. In newer cities that sprung up in the Industrial Revolution, the poor lived in the inner areas near the factories, while the rich moved to the outside of town to escape the population that was a product of factories. The poor were crowded into slums and small tenements. Crowding large, dirty families into a small living space led to unsanitary situations, as disease and sickness would spread very quickly through a factory. Most of the poor worked in factories, which also led to spread of sickness when they were overworked and weak, which made them more susceptible to viruses.